Heyo, this is Paleac, and in this tutorial I'm going to be talking about microtonal music and using Microtuner, which is a Ableton Max for Live device, in conjunction with MPE compatible synths. And I'm going to talk a little bit about MPE and how you can use and abuse it to create like really weird, interesting harmonic textures and chords and stuff like that. So this is like an impossibly deep subject, and I'm not a microtonal music theorist by any means. So I'm just gonna give you kind of like a bare bones explanation of like the point of microtonal music and tuning systems. And I'll also provide a bunch of resources of people who've done much better video tutorials explaining the basics of like microtonal music theory. I find it all super interesting and fascinating, and I feel like if you can wrap your head around some of that, then everything else about Western music theory starts to make a lot more sense. Now, maybe you've listened to microtonal music before and you didn't like it and you thought it sounded super dissonant and weird and too abstract and avant-garde and just fucking, I don't know, unenjoyable. And to that, I would say to listen to it again and expose yourself a little bit more, because that's kind of how music and art works, you know? Like how many of your favorite songs or albums did you not like the first time you listened to them? For me, I could say almost all of them. You know, the most interesting and most valuable stuff tends to be a little difficult to get into when you start off. And I think that is especially the case with microtonal music. Now, I do admit there is a lot of bad microtonal music out there, just as there's a lot of bad Western music out there. I would say like 99% of all music is pretty bad. When we're making music, we're just trying to make as much trash as we can to understand how to not make it and to get to that 1%, you know? Microtonal music is a pretty niche musical subcategory, and there's not that many people experimenting out there with xenharmonic tunings. So naturally, the pool is very small. It doesn't have foundations of music theory spanning, you know, centuries. And to be honest, a lot of it ends up kind of sounding like mathematicians masturbating over tuning systems rather than someone trying to make an emotional piece of music. So I can understand that. However, microtonal music has just as much, if not more, capacity for harmony and concordance than Western music does. And if you're interested in hearing what I would consider to be good microtonal music, I made a little playlist of some pieces that I really like. One artist that I highly recommend listening to and exploring his discography would be Sevish. He's the largest name who's doing electronic microtonal music, so a lot of like breakbeat. He does a lot of cool stuff. Manfish does a lot in just intonation, which is a tuning system where you're, instead of approximating things using equal divisions of an octave, you are precisely tuning everything to different interval harmonic ratios. And then Zayana Eros also does some really cool, almost like classical jazzy kind of sounding stuff. She has also a lot of really cool videos on music theory and microtonal music theory. So what do I mean when I say things are harmonically or mathematically in tune? So to understand that, you need to understand the harmonic series. So essentially, when you, let's say you pluck a string, like a guitar string, right? From here to here, it's going to oscillate in some way. Kind of like a sine wave, kind of not like a sine wave, because there's going to be overtones within the waveform, because all waveforms, all oscillating, repeating waveforms can be characterized and expressed as a sum of all of the harmonics and overtones that make up it. To understand why that is the case, you have to note that it is fixed here and it's fixed here. So however this oscillates, it needs to oscillate in such a way that these points are fixed. And if you look at this, all of these harmonics have a node at 0, you know, like 0 amongst the y-axis, if, you know, this is positive and this is negative, above and below the string. The only frequencies that will be 0 at these node points are going to be the harmonics and harmonic series. So if I go to a wavetable synthesizer and I pick some crazy, weird pattern, it's going to be composed of only harmonics. It's just that the amplitudes and the ratio of the harmonics with each other are going to vary and be different. But since this is a repeating pattern from here to here, it can only be composed of waves that repeat from here to here. That's the only way it can mathematically work out. So no matter how I change this, you'll see that the only thing that's changing really in this frequency spectrum is the amplitude of these harmonics. And you can see this on everything. It's just the harmonics are changing, and that creates the timbre of the instrument, essentially. So harmonics, or frequencies that have integer ratios to each other, are going to sound good to our ears. So for instance, if I take just a simple sine wave, you see this here, and then I add another sine wave, and it's playing at twice the frequency, 1 octave above, they fit perfectly within each other, right? And then if I slightly increase the tuning to make this faster, you're going to see that it starts to get out of tune, and thus the shape changes, and it doesn't fit perfectly within it. So if I set it so that I have 2 frequencies playing, and one is playing at 1.5 times the frequency of the other. Now, just keep in mind, this is like an integer multiplication, and then this is the decimal multiplication. So if this is at 500, this is 1.5 times the frequency of this one, which is just at 1. That means that they're going to be playing at a 3/2 ratio, because 1.5 equals 3/2. And this is a perfect fifth. I don't know why the oscillator looks wacky like that. It should be completely stable, but you can see how it's stable. It's just jumping between these 2 different forms. And then if I increase this a little bit, it starts moving, and then starts to sound out of tune. So that's called a perfect fifth, and the reason why this is stupid is because you could play that same exact thing on the keyboard. I'm going to mute the fifth I put inside the operator. This is a perfect fifth. Same exact thing. The reason why it's called that is because if you're playing on the white keys, this is 5 steps away from your root note. Only on the white keys. This is in reality 7 steps above. It's called a perfect fifth because it helps people who are playing instruments immediately understand, you know, so if you're playing in a diatonic key of A minor or whatever and you want to play fifth above, you just move 5 white keys. But it really makes it really fucking confusing in all this terminology when you start looking at things in other tuning systems. Like an octave, we've come to just know that that means twice the frequency of something. But an octave, oct means 8, and really this is 8 steps above the fundamental frequency when you're working within only white keys. So that terminology only actually makes grammatical sense if you're working within a very narrow subset of music, and especially Western music. So that's why I hate music theory terminology in general. But it's what we have, and we're stuck with it. And then besides the perfect fifth or the 3/2 ratio, there's other ones. So this is 4/3, meaning like 1 1/3, right? And as you can see, this is very slightly shifting. That's because this can't actually go to 3.33 repeating. So if I increase it just by 1, it starts moving in the opposite direction. So when you're playing music, how do you know if like something is out of tune or sounds bad? It's because it tends to be. When something sounds bad, it's because it doesn't have a strong relationship to other things. You can think of things having harmonic relationships as like almost like shapes. Like if you're drawing a picture and you're trying to like create a landscape or some sort of thing, you're probably going to be like drawing shapes and have lines that connect to each other. So you can think of a fifth as like a line of some sorts at some certain angle. And then you can think of like the octave as like a different sort of line that connects them all together. And then a chord turns into a triangle. And so you're making all these shapes. Now, things that sound dissonant don't really make as much sense harmonically to our ears. And you could think of that as like, let's say a triangle that isn't connected, that isn't closed entirely. It looks kind of like a scribble. And so if you start fucking scribbling on this, and of course that doesn't mean that certain dissonant or quote-unquote bad chords are always going to be bad. It just means that it has a certain time and place, just like if you were drawing like an abstract painting and you wanted to put like a triangle that just isn't fully connected, that can totally work in certain contexts. But if the entire painting that you're drawing is full of triangles that are closed and fully connected, and then one of them is fucked up, it's going to draw your eye and it's going to make you think, is that a mistake? I don't understand the relation there. Because music is just making patterns in time. It's just different types of patterns using frequencies and notes instead of, you know, color or shape or what have you. And the way that they manifest and evolve over time are the patterns and the story that you're trying to tell. Okay, now finally we can get to microtones, why I made this video in the first place. So, as you can see, let's look at this chart here. We've divided the octave into 12 evenly spaced notes. These are all the notes. And then you can see over here, these are the perfect integer ratios marked over here. Now, when you divide an octave into 12 equal steps, it's not actually going to perfectly represent any of these relationships, but it can approximate them very closely. And it happens to be that when you divide it by 12, you get pretty good approximations for a bunch of them. You can see here, 9/8 is approximated very well, 4/3 is approximated very well, and 3/2 is approximated very well. And then there's a bunch of these other ones that are not as good, but still are decent. So essentially, 12-tone equal temperament gives us certain shapes to work with. Now, if you look at different tuning systems, if we look at 17 EDO, which is, as you could probably assume, dividing it into 17 equal steps, this gives you different interval relationships to work with. So, for instance, we have 11/7 over here, which is very poorly approximated right here. But here, it's much more better approximated, and it gives us different colors and things to work with. It opens up entire new chords and possibilities that are mathematically just as in tune as using standard Western 12-tone, but sound totally different. Alright, so that's my spiel on microtonal stuff. If you're interested in that, I'm gonna link some tutorials that explain some of this stuff better, and really, I ultimately just advise that you just play around with it. You don't need to like know theory to go around in it, you know? I'm sure when you first started producing, you didn't know any music theory and you're kind of just scribbling notes. And that's pretty fun in its own right, and it leads you to different results. And playing around with microtones gives you the same kind of feeling. You end up just end up just like improvising, and you're working in a realm that you're really unfamiliar with. So typically if I'm working with like microtonal music, if I want to make something in 17 EDO, you put in Microtuner, you set pitches to 17, you hit generate. Now there's 17 pitches. It does fuck with the piano roll, so now instead of this being an octave, this ends up being 1 octave from here to here. So oftentimes if I'm working within this, I might put some notes over here and then like silence them. So I can use this as like a reference frame of, okay, these are my octaves that I'm working with. So here's an example of a song I made a while ago. This is in 7 EDO. So I highly recommend working with smaller size EDOs. The highest I've gone successfully was like 19 or 22. I wouldn't, at least when working within just like Ableton's piano roll, when you get to like the higher EDOs, like 31, which a lot of people say 31 is like one of the best in terms of the number of intervals you can approximate and like the tools you have available. There's so many notes that it gets overwhelming really, really quickly. Like if you're doing 31, then 1 octave is going to be, what, up 3 octaves is 36, down 5. That's 1 octave. And then, so, I don't know, it becomes a nightmare really quickly. I recommend working with like 7, 17, 19, 15, things around there. You know, the less number of notes you have, the harder it is to like get overwhelmed. I guess I'll just press play. So, honestly, this is a really, really simple song. It's just this chord progression. Just that chord progression over and over again, and then I put an arpeggiator on it. So I would recommend just go by ear, create some chords that sound good, and then maybe sprinkle some notes from those chords around, and then add an arpeggiator. So have this is the main melody, and then I added these little offbeat chords, which I think are all literally the same chords, just with a, what is that, a square wave, I think, instead? Nope, still just a triangle wave. And then this is just another arpeggio. And this one is just on 16th notes instead of 8th notes, etc. So, yeah, if you get overwhelmed, just remember arpeggiators are cheat codes. So let's say I wanted to create a chord progression or a melody within just normal 12-tone equal temperament. How do I tend to go about that? Well, I would first start off by finding a scale or a subset of notes that tend to sound good. So I usually play in like a minor scale. I know that minor is all the white notes from A to A, the octave above it. Now, if you look at how this is constructed, it consists of a whole step or two semitones apart, and then one step, one semitone, and then 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. And so this pattern is what creates a minor scale. And so then I can transpose it around or wherever I want. I can push it behind the piano roll and mute it, and then I can fold everything, and then whatever I draw in right here is going to be in some minor scale. Make it really slow or sound more sad. The same principle extends to microtonal music. So if I were to say pick a much larger tuning, like 28 tones, there's no way I'm going to be able to figure something out by like scribbling on a 28 tone scale, right? Because this is going to be our octaves. Our root's at C, and then it's up 24, 28. So this is the size of our octave that we're working with. Now I need to find a way to fill this up with notes in some sort of fashion that maybe they'll sound good. And so I can go about this by building it in the same way that one might build a minor scale in 12-tone equal temperament. It's constructed of small steps and large steps. Now, in 12-tone equal temperament, a small step is 1 and a large step is 2. But in much larger EDOs, you have more liberty to get weird with it. So here I can make it so that a small step is 1 and a large step is 3. And now the math will work out that can create, let's say if I want to just alternate small step, large step, small step, large step, it works out that I'm going to have 7 small steps and 7 large steps. It's going to add up to 28 because 7 times 3 is 21 plus 7 times 1 is 28. There's a bunch of different ways that you can construct scales within different EDOs, and through that you can end up writing music within those scales, and it ends up being a lot easier and less overwhelming. So I'm going to go 1 step, 3 steps, 1 step, 3 steps. I'm going to do this all the way through. And here we go. Now we have a scale to work with. And so now that I have this, I can try writing something. So for instance, and now within Microtonal, I have like this ability to play these notes that are very close to each other and creates this kind of tremolo effect when they play together. Or we can change this up a little bit. So this right now is currently just going large, small, large, small, large, small the entire time. What happens if it's like small 3 times in a row per second, and then it's large, and then small, and then large 3 times in a row again, right? And now it goes small, large, small, large, small, small, large, 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 small, large, small, small, small. So it gets weird. So what does this sound like if you ascend up it? Fuck if I know. And then we can also just throw all the notes in here, and then use an arpeggiator. Now, I'm also going to talk a little bit about how does Microtuner work in MPE, because once you understand this, you can do some really interesting stuff. So, MPE, I'm going to turn off Microtuner for now. So if I have, let's say I have this chord, if I can turn on note expression here, and since Wavetable is an MPE compatible synth, you can go in and then turn on note expression, and then you can go in and then you can tune and pitch shift every individual note. Then there's also this audio effect or instrument effect called MPE control. And what this does is it allows you to modify how your MPE automation is affecting stuff. So you can also automate and change pressure and slide for in different notes, which you can map to different things. So I guess this can be like relating to, this is similar to how like velocity and stuff works, but over time and over note. I don't think I have, yeah, slide and pressure. Oh. So yeah, I can map pressure to the basic shapes, and then I could go in for individual things and then change them. And then with MPE control, this is basically how you're multiplying your MPE controls. So if I set the min to be at the max and the max to be at the min, this is actually going to invert everything for pressure. If they're both at 0, then pressure is going to stay at 0. And then this gets more interesting in that you can start applying this to pitch bending. And so remember how I pitch bent all this stuff. Like this guy's going all the way up. Now, how does Microtuner come into all of this? So if I have this chord here, sounds like this in 12 tone equal temperament. And then I set it to, let's make it smaller, let's make it 6. I'm gonna draw a few more notes. And then let's make this, I don't know, 16. And then we take a look at this. Notice this has been shifted down and this has been shifted up. So what's going on is every note other than C3, because C3 is going to be kept stable. So C3 in any equal temperament is going to play the same frequency pretty much. But every other frequency is going to be bent using MPE to match the microtuning scale that you've set it to. So that's how that works. Now, the power in this is that if you use MPE control, like let's say I put MPE control right here, and I'm just using it on my normal 12-tone equal temperament thing. If I try to do the pitch bending, nothing's going to work because there's no pitch bending applied. It's all stuck here. I can move this dot around, but then they all move together. And what I'm looking for is I want to move them all independently in different ways. And so to do that, I'm going to apply Microtuner in some other EDO. So it's going to pitch bend all the notes in a different amount. And then I can move this around. But I want to pitch bend it in more interesting ways than that. So I'm going to get Spellbook, which is just going to make things a little bit easier. This isn't really like completely necessary, but if you don't know what Spellbook is, this is a $20 Max for Live device that I use in pretty much every single one of my videos. It's a multi-mapping 2-dimensional LFO. So this dot traces around this shape on the X and Y axis, and then you can map those axes to different parameters. And so I'm going to map all these parameters to different parts of this, and then we can move this around. It's going to start transforming in seemingly random ways that we can still control. So I'm going to mess around with this. So for whatever reason, with these devices, you have to touch the thing first. You have to control the knob before you can map to it. Otherwise, it might map to the wrong thing. And then I'm going to mix up all of these to be doing like different stuff. And let's open up this, and then let's offset the read amount. Bunch of this shit. I'm basically just randomizing all of these parameters, so it's doing very different stuff. Right. And then you can take all this. Let's make it even bigger. Stretch it all the way across, and then maybe add an arpeggiator. And then I don't like how it's completely random. I want it to be consistent every time, so I'm going to set this to read mode. Seems like it's mildly buggy. And like, I think when things loop over, the arpeggiator tends to get fucked up. But I think that's still fine. So like, what scale or key is this in? Fuck if I know. It doesn't have one. It's just being pitch bent. But you know, if you loop something and repeat it enough, you can make anything sound good. And yeah. Now let's say I don't like that. I can offset this a little bit. Now, once you have something interesting, make sure that you record it down to MIDI. In my experience, these can be pretty buggy, and at some point just like break or stop working or stop outputting sound, and then you need to like replace them and then make sure that all the things are in the same exact parameters as before, and I just don't trust like that. So once you record this down to MIDI, remember all the note expression stuff gets completely saved. This is what was actually saved. So if I just turn off Microtuner and turn off MPE control, because keep in mind, Microtuner is still going to pitch shift it again. So yeah. So another thing that you can do with Microtuner is notice here that there's an A and a B tuning that you can switch between. And so what I like to do is I'll go to like A and I'll make the tuning extremely high, 128 pitches per octave, which is like damn near continuous. And then over here I'll make this very low at just 2 per octave. And then if you open up blend, there's a blend knob that lets you blend smoothly between the two values, the two tuning systems. So if I go in here and I draw in, just make one big chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, with 8 notes, because I think Wavetable has a maximum of 8. Yeah, I can play at max 8 notes at a time. So we'll play these 8 notes, and then we'll stretch them out. And then, something like that. And then, of course, you can then attach a spellbook to this blend knob if you want, or an LFO. And then the LFO can do that. Add an arpeggiator to the thing. Add some drums, because why not? Now it's a little bit funny because I spent like the first 15 minutes of this video talking about like harmonic and microtonal music theory and what makes something sound good or what have you, and then I just ended up saying fuck all of that and randomized the pitch tunings of everything completely to get cool ideas, because ultimately at the end of the day, just if it sounds good, it is good. You know, it doesn't really matter. One of the greatest things about making microtonal music is you're taken so far away from anything that's familiar that you end up just kind of working by ear again. You know, like I'm not making the same chords that I always make, because the same chords I always make don't exist anymore. You're in a completely new field. It's like being a child again, almost. And I don't know, it's very refreshing and cool. So to leave you off, I'm going to show you this little song that I've been working on. All these MIDI notes were made completely randomly using just like spellbook automation over MPE control into a microtuner. You can see how all that was working. And yeah, it makes a cool little breakbeat thing. So here is what I think is proof that you could do this random tuning shit. This isn't in any official tuning or EDO or anything. Completely just by ear, and I think it still sounds pretty cool. So yeah. But yeah, I think that sounds pretty cool. It sounds pretty alien and weird, a little unsettling, but like still you can dance to it. Still has like a hook because it repeats a lot. So yeah, I hope that this was all inspiring in some way. And yeah, I do have to say, like making microtonal music, I'm much more likely to fuck up and give up on a project because it's harder to write something catchy or memorable in a system you're totally unused to. But I think it is very rewarding, and the world needs more microtonal music because it's cool. So yeah.